Welcome everyone to yet another Viterbi Startup Garage Oceanside chat. I'd like to welcome our special guest, Earle Hager, who has been through the garage a few times to support our teams and some of the student programs. Just a little bit about Earle. He's the managing partner at Neutrino Donut, a consultancy focused on the management and commercialization of science. They've basically helped 300 technologies through assessment, over 200 business development projects in innovation technologies, and both domestic and international. He has participated in projects and grant reviews for the DOE, the DOD, NIH, and NSF. We were just chatting a little bit about his interactions with the I-Corps program and how they are providing a little bit more services in the SBIR area. He helps to run multiple startups. He's a member of 2 grant review panels for NIH and DOD. And then again, some of his international experience is in countries like Hungary, India, Korea, Mexico, Portugal, Chile, Qatar, and a bunch of other countries. He has a BS in economics and an MBA in international business. And please, Earle, continue to introduce yourself at greater length if you'd like. I'm going to pass it to you. Thanks for being with us.
Good afternoon. I'm trying to do a share screen. How does that look?
It looks good, but it's just not in presentation mode.
There we go.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to be going through a slideshow that talks about the SBIR process. The whole idea is that the SBIR program is a series of grants that are available for startups. There's a process that you need to follow. There's also some things you need to do in homework before you get involved in this. I have provided a copy of my presentation in the slideshow, in the chat room, along with my contact information. If you're interested in chatting and talking about your specific project, send me a note. We'll set up a time to chat. And I'm kind of open on how and when we do this because, well, no one's going anywhere and I have time over the holidays. So let's get started and we're going to talk about what the SBIR process is and how it might help out your program. And it's not August 25th, but I didn't get to that one. So there's my contact information, which is part of the process. I'm currently in Culver City. I used to live in Austin. One of the few people that moved in the opposite direction. I've worked with global technology commercialization projects, SBIR, STTRs. I met Stephen Hawking at Caltech once. These are some of the universities I've worked with as well. So what's going on right now is that corporate innovation and licensing is not really happening. R&D is down. The organizations, instead of looking 5 years out on new technologies, are basically looking for products that are ready to go to market now, and they're having maybe a 2-year event horizon. Biotechnologies are really getting hit because there's a slowdown. There's going to be gaps in the studies that are being done, and all the angels and VCs are getting more and more conservative. So you got a plan. Government grant programs are important. They provide money, but they also provide validation, and this validation is very helpful when you're trying to raise money later on or trying to get to connect with customers potentially for your organization. Phase 1 grants are associated with the technical issues of your project. Phase 2 grants demonstrate the marketability of your project. They're 2 different functions and they have 2 different processes, and the money there is a grant. It is not funding, it is not diluted ownership or loan. It is a straight out grant. If you're successful in the SBIR project process, then you can talk to Angels VCs and everyone else. And it's a lot more attractive because the government and the independent folks around this have cited your idea as being interesting. So as part of the process, you identify your industry partners, your market entry strategy, and the number of people that are involved in this process are very interesting. They're high-end research partners, tech transfer folks, industry specialists, potential clients, but they're giving you feedback, and their feedback is very valuable. And if they like your idea, it's going to have a pay off very well in further steps in your process. Your greatest asset's yourself. That's an important thing to remember, because if your idea doesn't work out, there's always your next idea. So we need to talk about the entire solution of what you're going to be putting together. We need to look at all of the steps and then start working forward. You can't do this on a piecemeal basis. And we're going to talk about the planning that goes into this. So right now, COVID-19 projects are at the front of a lot of the lines. There's a program out there called RADx, R-A-D, capitalized and then small x, which is where all the COVID projects are going. But believe it or not, most of them are getting filled now, and there's not a lot of them left. But COVID's getting a lot of attention. And as I noted, they're well-prepared grant programs get funded, and they also get feedback, because when your project is rejected, they will tell you, please fix the following things. And the next time your grant is reviewed, it'll be in terms of, did you fix the things that we told you to fix? Which makes it a lot easier. You have to move quickly in this thing. The grant review cycle is quarterly. There's always a new round and a new round and a new round. The next round ends January 5th or so for most of the agencies. And then the next one after that is like April or May. So you're not going to make January 5th, obviously, but you start planning for the April or May submission times. So phase 1 grants are 300K. That's where you demonstrate, you ask the science questions that you need to ask. Phase 2 is 1.5 million, and that's how you enter the market. You will identify folks who will help you develop a technology, develop the market version of a medical device, for example, and go through all those steps. And what are you going to do with the money is not a joyful thing, but it's a matter of figuring out all of your steps, identifying all of the things that need to be done, and making sure they're part of it. 3 scientists together on a phase 2 grant doesn't do anything. 3 scientists, along with a lawyer, along with business development folks, along with industry experts, along with an organization that's going to help develop the device, that's the stuff that gets funded. So you need to identify the process, identify your partners, and it needs to be a thorough team that gets put together. Now, part of putting together this team is not necessarily that you're paying the people right now, but you're identifying the people that you're going to bring in when you need them. If it's a new product or a current product for a new market for a current product or a new feature, you have to define what it is you're trying to do and identify the different markets. And believe it or not, understanding the market and understanding business is an area where a lot of these grant applicants fail, because you have 2 or 3 scientists who understand the science, but don't have the team to take it into the marketplace. So you identify the steps that you need, and you also need to figure out what you need help in and how you're going to bring in that resource. And again, since you're budgeting for your grant, you don't have to pay them now. You budget for them when the grant is received. You'll be bringing these partners in. So there's a big word called aims. Aims is what you say, the things that you need to get done. You're going to say, this technology in the evaluation stage is going to be focused on these 3 things. Does it measure the blood levels for certain things? Does it do other things? But I mean, these aims have to be very specific, and the people that are reviewing you are going to want to make sure that the aims that you've identified make sense and are aggressive. How's the speed right now? Am I going at the right rate for you guys?
I think it's a good speed.
Okay. So this is all in the homework before you even apply for the grant, but you got to put together a 1 or 2 page summary of your project idea. It's got to be non-confidential, and you can also have links to technical papers, because science people like reading technical papers. They hate 1 or 2 page summaries. But you need to develop this in the very beginning to say, I have a technology that'll do these things. So there's 2 kinds of people that review these things, the science people, the business folks. The business folks are going to say, this is of interest to our company or organization or the grant, and they'll throw it to the science people. The science people will really go into the depth. The thing about writing as if the person is an expert in the field is a very important part of the process, because you really need to not spend time saying the diabetes market is going to be doing this, 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 and this. They don't care. You need to say, I'm working on a diabetes technology that does these things. So the first sentence is, this is a diabetes technology. The second sentence is, go to the meat. Something that's also available for you to go is to work with tech transfer offices, because they will often have technologies that might be of interest for these projects, or they might have a technology that can be added to what you're working on. The advantage of working with like the USC Tech Transfer Office is that any of their ideas have very expensive lawyers behind it. And that makes it more difficult for organizations to challenge you. Because the first rule of patents is that all a patent does is give you the right to sue somebody. So if you are working with the university, you can take an option on the technology and renew it as needed. What happens is that you can take the option out, or you can go for a provisional patent and then apply for a grant at the same time. And then about 7 or 8 months down the road, you'll find out what happened with your grant application, which means you can then decide whether you want to extend the option or whether you want to continue in anything else out there. Let me pause for a second. Any questions?
Some questions. And then obviously you guys can use the hand raising function. When you're talking about team building and, you know, finding experts, having some CEO or business folks on your team, do you have any advice based on your experience on how to find those people and get their commitments to your, you know, your project or what it is that you're building? Because I do think it's a little bit challenging for instance, like faculty researchers to kind of break into, you know, the inboxes, or even just know where to look for those types of people.
I would talk with other people in the department, but I will also go out to the tech transfer office and ask them for recommendations. There are companies out there that specialize in developing medical devices, for example, or other areas. But I mean, that is, the tech transfer office might be a good resource on that. They also know a lot of entrepreneurs out there who are looking for something to do. So if you're looking for somebody with expertise in a different market that might be interested in being a salesperson, or have the industry contacts at least to help you out, that would be another resource out of that office. So that would be my first suggestion. I do consulting in this space. If you are getting money after your phase 1 and you're working on your phase 2, there are a lot of organizations which are assigned by the government agency, whether it's NSF, DOE, or anyone, who will be doing market research reports for you on behalf of the agency. And part of their job will be to identify some of these partners. And that is a free report to you. It's being funded by the different agencies.
Oh, that's amazing. And then during the COVID times, because I feel like a lot of these networking opportunities happen, you know, in person at events and things like that. Do you have any advice as to how to connect during a time where no one's kind of meeting up in person?
That's where the tech transfer office and some of the other folks would matter, because they can reach out to people specifically and they'll know where the cell phones are. They'll also have a relationship that might get calls returned more easily. I have a lot of companies that I work with, as do many other people, and I get my calls returned by certain people. Other people, my agreement is if you're not interested, just ignore it. And that works out fine too.
I'm going to pass it over to John Paul, who has his hand raised.
Hey, thanks a lot for taking the talk with us today. I'm wondering about the IP, and we, in our case, for instance, we filed a provisional maybe about a year ago that's since expired, and I'm wondering if there's any requirement to have an active patent process as you're applying to either of these, you know, whether it's phase 1 or phase 2 grant.
It's not a requirement. It helps if you have an active patent. But sometimes people say we're working as a trade secret, and that's part of their business model, which is not unusual and doesn't hurt them. There's also, but yeah, I think the main thing is you don't want something that I can look at your idea and immediately come up with my own version of it and go into the marketplace. That's actually a problem NASA has. But yeah, if you can do some sort of protection around it, where there's trade secret or something like that, that helps.
Got it. Thank you.
Hazel, you're up.
Yeah, thanks, Earle. We just submitted a SBIR application and got approved to submit a phase 1. And so you're saying January 5th would be the deadline for the phase 1 review that's coming up the soonest, right? If it's on a quarterly basis?
Something like that. Yeah, it depends on which program you're looking at.
Great. Yeah, because ours is a COVID-related solution. MIT has a algorithm that they developed. I was wondering what you thought of, moving forward with the way investors, especially VCs, look at coordination with the Office of Researches and Tech Transfer Office that you mentioned. Is there any type of adverse future impact that investors might have, reservations on if you collaborate at university? Do they view that as a potential risk, or are they pretty accepting of that kind of licensing agreement?
They hate tech transfer offices. So working with a startup is a better thing. If you get a license agreement or the option with the university for the technology, then the VCs will be happy to talk to you. Universities never sell their rights. They will assign the global rights in perpetuity for all markets or specific markets. But as far as the but if you have that license with the university, you'll be able to talk to VCs and other folks.
Okay, that makes sense. Because the VCs are always like, oh, is it an exclusive license and things like that. But it's good to hear that it's a perpetual license instead of something they review on a yearly basis.
That's something you'll negotiate with the university on how that'll work. If you have an option, you can keep it going. What happens is when you come into money, you have to have a licensing agreement put together. But that's very often universities don't care how far out that actually happens. They're more interested in the fact that you're a startup and you're making something happen with their USC technologies.
Got it.
And this is a USC or MIT?
I'm open to working with USC to do the research to get the sample size, because we're training AI and we need a pretty large base. But MIT, we won one of their recent hackathons, so they're letting us do a partnership with them. So they're more open to us licensing if we just came from outside.
Either works. Either are big name schools. Either school work. Now the thing is that when you're doing writing the grant proposal for phase 1, is that the university is going to be writing part of it, because the part that they're doing the research on, they're going to say, these are the resources, this is what it's going to cost. And university resources always have an overhead rate of 50% or higher, depending on the university. And that's part of their calculations, but they'll come back and say, it's going to cost $150,000 to work with MIT or USC on the research of this. And that fact is going to help your application, because having a university partner means it's also more serious.
Got it. And one quick question on SBIR so we applied SBIR Innovation Core with the Army. How is that different than the normal SBIR process, or is it pretty similar?
They're all pretty similar. The thing you have to watch for is that you can't have the rules on the PI is that you have to spend 51% of your time on the project. Now that actually means nothing. And I'll say this again, that actually means nothing. What it does mean is that you can't be the PI on 2 projects.
Oh, okay.
So you need to have different PIs specified. Now, you can apply for multiple grants on similar ideas, but what happens if for some reason you win a few of them, you will then have to coordinate the money issue.
Yeah.
So that you don't get 3 overhead deals, but you can say for the Army grant, you've got these aims. For the NIH grant, you have these aims, and so forth. You have a bunch of options to manage on that.
Okay. Is there any point that they consider it mutually exclusive if it's too similar?
If you win one, the other one might turn you down then. But I mean, there's nothing unethical about doing that. I mean, they'll see that, and then if you win, you'll have to coordinate that. You have to understand that the auditing people on this are pretty smart, and you can't play games.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, when you're doing your budgets on this, is that the PI is a key person, and switching out a PI is a big deal. Everything else is negotiable. What a lot of people will do is they'll put in the budget, I'll take 3 trips, and the 3 trips are going to cost $15,000. And then when you need cash to move to somewhere else, you'll suddenly decide that you're only going to take 2 trips, and all that money is suddenly available to move somewhere else. And no one cares about that shifting of funds as long as all the money is appropriate and auditable and in support of the project.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much, Earle.
Okay.
One quick question before you get back to your slides. I'm just going to bring up what you've presented on a little bit. Wondering if you can just give me like a quick example of like when you were talking about aims and how specific and good they have to be, like an example of a really bad one versus a really good one.
Okay, so you guys, everyone knows their markets and everyone knows what's possible in there. So let's just say you find a certain germ level, and what's the current industry standard on identifying the amount of E. coli in the water? And you're going to increase your ability to wipe out the E. coli. Well, they're going to know what's possible, what's not possible. And they're going to say what you're doing is enough of a boost to the marketplace to where this is interesting. So you as an expert in your area need to take a good look at what's the current standard and what you can do to improve upon that. Now, the purpose of the grant is to actually do that. So you've got to set the aim high enough to where this is possible. At the same time, you're being paid to try. And being paid to try is the key part of that, is that you're not guaranteeing it. You're saying, I think we can do this.
Excellent. Okay. Does any, I mean, I say just for time purposes, we can move on.
Okay. So the SBIR project there's about 2.2 billion set aside. These slides are about a year or so old, and I should change them, but I haven't yet. Deal with it. So that's how much money is available, just tons of money on this. Now, everybody makes money on these things. It's a very happy thing because jobs are created, research gets done, businesses are created, they get bought out, new ideas hit the marketplace. Everyone loves this. They love this so much that Trump didn't mess with it. That's how much it was loved. So this is an example on the, when you see the slideshow, the slide deck from Arcelia, there's information on government grants, SBIR grants, and the awards list. Follow the links. So the funding is for a startup company. A startup company is 500 employees or less in every interconnected part of the company, which means General Motors cannot have a small company. There's R21 and others for research grants. That's important to understand because you can actually be working on the company with a professor and you can get a research grant that might advance the technology as well. So all these people have sources of funding. Look under SBIR for each area, topic area, determine the ones that are of interest. DOD has these things, coming up to that next, aren't I? Yes, I am. These things called broad agency announcements. And that's an SBIR program for the military. But now all of these things have general ideas, and you need to connect with the program managers, which is what we're going to connect with next. But all the topic areas are generalized. So, by the way, there is an Army Research Lab connected with USC. It's out in the Playa Vista Commons area, I believe. So the whole SBIR process, and this is a word you need to know, besides aims, you also need the word pay line. And the pay line says every project that got a score lower than this, the scale is 1 through 100, gets paid. So if the pay line is 28 and your score was 26, you are probably getting paid and funded. If the pay line is 28, they will often look at 28 to 38 to see if there's anything of interest. If you're in the military, they'll just decide whether you get paid, whether it's funded or not, because if it's of interest, they're going to do something about it. Here are links to online training for the SBIR projects. Follow the links. This is the difference between the SBIR and the STTR. If in the STTR, you're working with the Tech Transfer Office. Oddly enough, TTR, Tech Transfer Office. The SBIR has a lot more money, a lot more agencies, and that's really where we're focusing on here. These are the different technology topic areas that were within the National Science Foundation 1 year. And you can see all these different areas. And then you can say, well, I've got an Internet of Things item, so let me explore that. And the way you do that is you will look up the program director and find the person in charge of the Internet of Things, which is Rick here. And when you're talking, you will email Rick your 2-page summary and say, hey, Rick, this is what I'm working on. And Rick may come back and say, nah, this is more of a smart health. You need to talk to Jesus. But I will forward it to Jesus because all these people know each other. They used to be across the hall from each other and before COVID, but they all know each other. They will all share information with each other, and contacting one does not preclude you from having a relationship with somebody else, but don't send it to all of them. So know your program managers, get connected, ask them if there's a priority. I forgot who was talking about getting approval to apply for a phase 1 because she went through the program director process, and confidential information can be shared. So you can get feedback from these folks. They'll give you an understanding of whether it's of interest. They may also give you feedback on your aims, whether the aims look strong enough. There is also a quick pitch routine, which I think I'm covering next. Yes, the quick pitch routine. And for that, you need to do 3 250-word questions, and they will give you an authorized number and allow you to apply with this authorized number. The reason they do that is they want to get rid of the crappy solicitations. No flux capacitors. There's a new program called Drive. There's also a couple of other areas where they're trying to link to different venture capital groups and accelerators across the country. So you may want to check out the Drive Accelerator program as well. So the program managers bless it. It then goes to a team of reviewers. This is the review panels that I'm on. So there'll be about 20 people. 3 people will be the primary people in reviewing the technology, and then the whole table will vote. And it's very difficult to influence the vote for or against a specific technology because there's just way too many people involved. And if everybody else is giving it a 4 or 5 and you want to give it a 1, they're going to ask you why. So it's part of the process, but I mean, they're doing their best to keep this legitimate and prevent somebody from killing an idea because they don't like somebody or whatever. So a failure point. The commercialization process requires expertise and a well thought out process. This is key. You should be writing this down. It's on the test. But it's very important that you have a plan for entering the market. And that is a very major failure point on in this area. One person I dealt with, they said their answer was they knew people, they were going to share the information with them, and that was their sales process. And they were rejected. That specifically was cited as a problem because they didn't really have any business development things. And I was on the panel when they came back, and I was like, you didn't listen to me, did you? And they got rejected again because they didn't have a plan to enter the market. The idea is in a phase 2 is that you have a goal of making money, and how do you think you're going to make money? And that you have to have a plan, and it has to make sense. So you need to identify partners, companies, competitors, and sources. And this involves finding a name. This isn't just saying DuPont or Dow Chemical or Bayer or whatever the case is. You got to identify the people that you want to deal with. LinkedIn is the way to go. I make money on LinkedIn, to be honest, because I have a huge network of people that I can find. I know that people are looking for new technologies, and so do a lot of other people in this. But I mean, you got to come down and say, here are the people I'm contacting, and here are the people I'm targeting. The failure point on all this is, people know what the product needs to look like. Do they know how long it takes for someone to sell? For example, if you're dealing with retail products, retail shuts down on September 1st for the Christmas rush and the end of year holiday rush. So if you're selling anything in retail, February through June is pretty well the only time you can sell it. If you're dealing with people that are looking for grant applications or other projects, you just need to figure out what the process is. How long does it take to get in there? And this is another very big failure point. When someone says it's a $15 billion market and I win 0.5%, you aren't identifying the people you want to connect with. You're not identifying the companies, the targets, et cetera. You're just doing this vague generalization of it. You need to demonstrate profitability on $5 million in sales, for example, is what I usually recommend. So the next part, when trying to understand the company's processes, if you say, I want to sell it to GlaxoSmithKline for $200,000, the process of selling something to GlaxoSmithKline for $200,000 is extensive and multi-year. However, if you say I'm going to sell it to the individual departments for $10,000 each, you could probably sell 5 to 10 of them to different GlaxoSmithKline departments and not have the aggravation. But then on the other hand, if you say I'm going to sell to students for $50 a year, how are you going to find the students? How are you going to sell it to them? What's their buying cycle? And you're going to find that that's not going to work. But again, it's all process. You take it all the way down to the day-to-day process of buying your technology. So the purchasing process is key. You've got to be part of a buying group. The General Services Administration, GSA, is key for selling to government agencies, and you can become a partner with somebody who is on the GSA list and therefore sell to the government. So expanding your reach, you can license the technology and partner with them for an SBIR grant. You can work with a professor and get in the earlier technologies and research and run different programs. Now, the whole thing when working with a professor is if you're going to the USC website and trying to find out what texts are out there, whatever you see on their website is at least a year old. Because when the professor says, I have an idea that I want to have patented, the process of getting it through the lawyers, through the approval process and through the application process and getting it published to the point where they're willing to put it on their website is at least a year. So you need to talk to the professor, you need to be friendly with the professor and find out what's going on earlier than that. So as we discussed before, the PI cannot spend more than 51% of their time on the project only because you can't be a PI on 2 projects. It's an easy thing to manage. Actually at the garage, when I was there 2 years ago, there was a woman who, she was the PI on like 5 applications and they got shot down on that. So again, as noted, the changes to PI must be reviewed. And I talked about the budget opportunities again for playing games with the budgets. You need to figure out the best slot for the application. As noted here, if you have a medical device that's a scanning technology or is it a cancer technology, and you're going to find that the people that want to talk about cancer technologies are really into some heavy stuff that you don't, probably not, they're not going to consider you as a medical device. You need to talk to the medical device folks. When you're writing your budget, you're allowed to have a 7% profit. You can also have a 10% overhead rate to cover your overhead on the things that aren't being done by the university. So you've got some flexibility there. You need to check carefully on what items are being permitted or banned. For example, patent costs cannot be directly billed, but they can be buried in that 17%. As we mentioned before, talking about USC and Harvard, these are the different overhead rates. The University of Texas is 58.5. UC Irvine, I think, was around 56%. If you get involved in the I-Corps program, I-Corps will give you $50,000 for marketing and business development, but not salaries. And that's a good program to help validate your project. But don't forget, since the government's giving you $50,000, they're going to take $13,000 back for their expenses to give you the $50,000 because that's the government.
Earle?
Yes.
Yeah, one note, just as an update on I-Corps, you know, since last spring, I-Corps has gone completely virtual, and the $50,000 that I-Corps gives out to what used to be in-person teams, that was strictly for actual incurred expenses, out-of-pocket expenses for travel, you know, attending trade shows, etc. So since there's no travel, the 50K is not there for the moment. Everything's virtual. We hope to return to that, but that's, you know, TBD.
Yeah, when the travel was there, and I did a couple of these things when I was at UC Irvine, we would put the entrepreneur on a plane and say, you're going to these 3 conferences. And I-Corps requires 100 interviews.
Right.
And so the best way to do that was to walk the exhibit floor, meet people, ask them questions.
Yep.
And that was a successful way, because at the end you had 20 people you cared about talking with, and you could spend your time on there.
Right.
Oh yeah, the other fun thing about the I-Corps program, when they did have the travel, was the first day you were supposed to talk to 5 people before you showed up, and the guy that was running it, I think his name was Babu, he would work his way around the room until he found someone that didn't do that, and then he would just yell at them in front of everybody. It was awesome. And we were all waiting for him to find that person, because nobody was hurt or anything like that, but he was making it really clear, you better take this stuff seriously. Any other questions since we hit a break point? Okay. Yes.
That looks clear.
Okay.
Here's like I'm just going to ask a dumb question. So, it sounds like with SBIR that there has to be some sort of university affiliated research. Is that true, or can you apply for SBIR and not be able?
It's not required. It often helps. If you are involving a university professor, it will be university-based research. You can't hire them as a consultant to do university research. The advantages of using the university research is that even though there is that university overhead, the cost of setting up a lab, et cetera, is a lot of money, and it's cheaper to actually just to work through the university on that. If you have your own researchers and your own labs set up, then you don't need to do that. It doesn't hurt you that way.
Do you guys have preference for, as panelists who are reviewing the applications for teams that are affiliated with the university just because of that overhead cost for labs and then just things like that?
The advantage to the university, again, is just the fact that you have all these lab tech space, all the resources, et cetera, to it. Usually university professors, when they're asked how much does it cost, you're going to decide how many grad students you're going to fund, and that's how they do their budgeting. And materials being separate, but that's how they calculate the people.
All right, I'm gonna Ross, go for it.
Yeah, hey Earle, this is Ross Mead from Semio. So early on, when you talked about sort of the technology, phase 1 being more focused on the technology,
Right.
I do have a question about how much of that technology is in itself developing the research versus taking research that's been done and making it be more accessible and commercializable to an audience. So in some sense, many of the traditional research aims might have already been hit and supported by experimental validation. And now you're trying to make it be something that's accessible to the market. How much of this is conducting the actual research itself versus packaging it up, if you will?
The phase 2 is packaging it up. You can do straight to phase 2, depending on where you are with your earlier research, or you might be able to do a thing called fast track, which is where you combine phase 1 and phase 2. And maybe the phase 1 is a shorter process where you're doing some validation of it, and say, if I receive these 3 aims, I want to automatically then go into phase 2, which in working with the program manager, they can make that determination whether they'll support that.
Gotcha, good to know. And one extra question here. So you mentioned the pay line a while back. Could you elaborate on that? What did you mean by a pay line?
It's your score. They rank you 1 through 100. The lower number, the better. And they have a certain amount of money, and when they identify enough projects that spend that money, that's where they set the pay line up. So if they're looking for 25 projects, they'll do the top 25 scores, and wherever that number 25 is the pay line.
Gotcha. Okay, good to know. Thanks.
Somebody else?
Yeah, Hazel.
Hi, Megan. Really quick. So we've been working with a UCSF. Well, she's been advising us for like a hackathon win that we had. And she's an epidemiologist and a biometrics background. You're talking about labs and hard costs. If it's mostly what we're doing is data and servers, like to what extent is the minimum university involvement that would strengthen application for SBIR instead of STTR?
She could be mentoring. She could do a lot. Is it she?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. She could be mentoring and she could do a lot of different roles in there. And she could also just be an advisor and getting paid on an hourly rate as an advisor. I mean, there's a lot of different roles she can do if she's just providing that information. If you don't need to use her lab space, then you can pay her an hourly rate as a consultant.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
But that having her involved would be a good thing.
Awesome.
Okay, back to Ross. One more question.
Yeah, and I got a dozen questions for you, Earl. I'll keep it short though. One of the things that's often talked about are the letters of support, hopefully from prospective customers. And then also, when you were talking about who you might be reaching out to, actually having individual names at companies who are in your contact list to pursue. I do have a question as well about external evaluation or external advisory boards in a project. So this is pretty common in more academic research applications. How important, if at all, is that in an SBIR?
Okay. We can set, Ross, you and I can set up a more depth conversation later on. But to get to your questions, one, letters of support are written by organizations that say, this is an interesting idea. This is about a week of the letters you can possibly imagine that says, this is an interesting technology and we look forward to working with a company if they're able to demonstrate the stuff that they said they're going to demonstrate. And this is how great our company is. I write them all the time. Lots of other people write them. Getting a large corporation to do it is a little bit trickier because usually it has to go through legal. And unless they're about to sign a contract with you, they don't necessarily like to write them. You can ask about them and they'll know exactly what you're talking about. And they'll also know whether or not they're going to write them at all. The people that you're bringing in as consultants and helping to staff these, your external advisory boards, they would be good sources for letters of support. It's good to find a couple of people that are potential customers, but at the same time, the people that you're working with can also be based on that. But again, the letter of support is a pretty weak document, but it just demonstrates that you've identified people to talk with. What was your next question? I'm sorry.
That was it. We could take it offline, but
Okay.
that was good to know about the letters of support. Thanks.
Yeah, but yeah, you definitely want to start. You definitely want to get letters of support. Anyone else?
It looks like you can get back to it.
Okay. So they have a program called TABA, T-A-B-A, it's a technical business assistance program. It becomes part of your budget. Sometimes you have to do this if you like the Department of Energy or NSF or NIH, but they'll basically say you're going to hire people to do the evaluation of your technology and the assessments. Excuse me, in Los Angeles, LARTA, L-A-R-T-A, is a big provider of this service, and I do consulting with them. But there's $5K available for phase 1 grants to look at the commercialization and evaluate the markets, and you get $50K on the phase 2. There's business development services, and you can choose a partner like, hey, me, as part of the application. If you don't specify, then they may have people assigned, but there's a lot of people that do this service. And once they announced that there was going to be $50K for the phase 2s, there's a lot of people that are interested in providing this service. What that also means to you is that if you identify a partner that might work with you, that also helps with your grant. So in doing the SBIR process, when you're writing it, there's a very tight format on it. Get to the point completely. The people that are reading it are smart. They know what you're talking about when you start, so you don't need to spend a lot of time doing the general stuff. You need to identify how large the market is and the growth of the market. That's about a paragraph long. And you know what, you can look up anything you want and write marketplace at the end of it, and you will find about 8 sites giving you numbers that you can use. The thing also to remember is that there's a lot of well-qualified applicants. So maybe 10% to 15% actually get funded. Now that doesn't factor in the crappy ones, but still, it's you got to be good. They do pitch days with the Department of Defense, where a lot of people are doing it externally or virtually. India matches SBI research funding. Other states match, but you do have to move there. Buffalo, New York will give you up to $5 million. Kentucky matches the SBIR grants. I'm talking with some folks in Tennessee this afternoon, actually. And this one company that I'm working with is out of Nashville, and they will double this SBIR money. So there's a lot of additional resources that are out of there. On the India program, if you identify things you need to get done and you assign some of them to the India program, then that's how you manage it. They're doing some of the research there and you're doing some of the research here. And Buffalo is cold. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but I'm going to be helpful. If you're trying to get bought out, you have to have IP. IP gets purchased. These are some interesting books to read. Philosophically, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. If you're working on anything in the military end of it, Mary Roach wrote this book on Grunt, which is about how the military takes care of servicemen and women in new technologies, whether it's designing uniforms, diseases, care after injuries. As horrible as the wars have been with Iraq and Afghanistan, the stuff that's been done on prosthetic devices has been stunning. The Art of War is a very interesting book, not because it's about war, but because it teaches you business strategy about moving the debate on whose idea is better to areas of your strength and things like that. And Phyllis Spicer wrote the book on tech transfer. She's the expert. Now what? Do your homework. Create your disclosure and identify your target areas. Sit down with your brain trust and discuss what you've got going on. Do all this planning up front and figure out what is the problem that people are trying to solve. Do all these steps as far as determining the funding levels, identifying the right grant, and communicate with the program manager. My daughter did this for me one year when she was like 9. She said, is this chessboard possible? And the answer is yes, because the knight advanced and then retreated because he lost his nerve. So don't lose your nerve. The path to marketplace involves planning. You've got to plan every step of this. And that's it. So now I'm open for questions across the board. And in fact, let me stop the share. That's probably easier. Then I can read your comments. So Hazel, you have a question.
Yes. So you had mentioned combining the phase 1 and phase 2 for fast track. We got invited for phase 1. How do you change that to be packaged and combined together?
You talk to the program manager and see if they'll recommend that.
Okay.
That's the program manager is key to all of these things because the program manager blessed your phase 1. I would suggest that if the program manager thought you were a good idea for a fast track, they would have mentioned it. Okay.
Yeah, because they're pretty quick. They approved our application in a week, which I was expecting 3 to 4. So I'm hoping that they like us. So that's a good sign. I'll request if we can bunch them together.
It means approving you means your technology is of interest to what they're targeting in the next go round, and your idea looks interesting. And there will be a lot of ideas in that particular area, but you know, it was a good idea. Is what it comes down to.
Okay. Makes sense. Thank you, Earle.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I'm curious about what exactly you do at a Neutrino Donut, and if you might talk about some of the work you've been up to.
So years ago, I was looking for the name of the company, and Technology Associates and stuff like that were all taken. So I wanted to come up with something because the Higgs boson stuff was happening, and so a pun on neutrinos was the answer. And DONUT stands for the direct observation of the neutrino tau, in case you're interested. And what makes that even more interesting is when the Internal Revenue Service calls you up and says, how come a donut shop has all of these different legal and consulting fees? And I was audited. But anyway, so what I do is I work with startups. I help them evaluate the grant programs, opportunities, business development, doing technology assessments. I'm doing this with LARDA and a few other organizations. I write commercialization plans for the SBIR grants. And I help people figure out how to enter the marketplace. And I do that from the 2nd floor in Culver City.
Got it. Yeah, thank you.
I have one sales manager and she wants to know what I'm putting into our account every month. That is advantageous as far as, you know, a lot of companies will have more of a larger overhead. I don't.
Great to know. Yeah, thanks.
Over to Ross.
Yeah, hey Earl. There's this idea of submitting your project idea to a program director and getting feedback to see if it's something they're interested in. Is there any value in calling up a program director and saying, hey, what are the main things that you're interested in, other than what you might just directly find on the website, which I feel like is kind of sparse?
Probably because you and several million of your closest friends all want to call the program director. So it's better to do it as an email. They respond to emails pretty quickly because that's their job. And that would be the way to do it. The thing is, it's not about what he wants. It's a matter of what you do and whether what you do fits into what their priorities are. Because don't forget, you may get the wrong program manager. You may be doing an IoT thing when it's actually a medical device. I mean, it's just a matter of figuring out where it needs to be. But if you go to SBIR.gov, you can see what things have been awarded in the past. You can also, by topic, and get an idea of what they found to be of interest in the past and what needed to be done. But the SBIR.gov has sites, and you can download all those things, including a detailed explanation of what each of the technologies were into an Excel spreadsheet, and then read that a lot. But that's the way of doing it. But I mean, yeah, everybody wants to call the program managers, and they don't like it's not effective.
That's what I figured. Thanks.
I have two questions. The first is just about what the biggest misconception is about SBIR and STTR kind of thing you're constantly repeating yourself on, and clarifying if there is anything like that.
The difference is that if you're doing STTR, you're working for the university and you're keeping the technology within the university. With the SBIR, you're setting up a startup. Companies that want to buy you out prefer dealing with the startups. In order to become a startup, you also have to go to a website called sam.gov. And you need to have a DUNS number and an employee identification number. And then you spend 2 hours going through a really mind-numbing process of registering yourself. And you have to do this because you have to validate that you don't have felony convictions and that you're not 51% owned by Iran and whatever else they're upset over at this time. But there's just steps you have to go through. But the SBIR as a startup is the way to go. And you can't be a nonprofit. You got to be for profit. And IRS rules require that every 3 years you have to be profitable at least once. And profitable means even $100 is fine.
My second question is just based off experiences that I've had with founders at the garage in the past. There are support systems and organizations that probably similar to Neutrino Donut that help startups kind of submit an application. Are any do you have any advice as to how to vet those organizations appropriately so that you're not just getting taken for a ride by somebody? Is there a place where you can, check to see if these kind of consultancies or support services, where they're vetted or anything like that? Any directional advice you can give for people who maybe feel overwhelmed by the SBIR process and are looking to source that out to somebody who's willing to help them?
I would check with the USC Tech Transfer Office and what they know about them. You can also ask for references and find out what they had going on with the different folks. You can also weigh your risk levels on how much you want to get involved. There are several companies out there besides LARTA. There's a company called Foresight, FRESIGHT. And those folks, they do a lot of reports and they have a lot of consultants working in that area. So generally, if someone's consistently working with a LARTA or a Foresight, that's also of interest to, that's also a sign that things are well. Contractually, you need to figure out how much you're committed to these folks. For example, I will talk with folks and figure out if there's a place and opportunity. And, someone's not going to write a report to you, generally write a report hoping to get paid on the back end. There's going to be a fixed number, but you figure out what the fixed number needs to be and how much it makes sense for you. The rapport, that sort of thing. There's a lot of places to check them out, but I would start
Red
with the
flags to look out for, Earl, like anything that you would say is like a pretty big red flag for these consultancies and things?
If they haven't done many of if they haven't done many projects like this, I would focus on that. I don't really know. This is a hard industry to fake.
Yeah.
And if you got some consistency with a Lauder or Foresight or somewhere else, that also is a good idea to check out.
Cool, thank you. John?
Yeah, I just have one last question on what kind of the end-to-end timeline is for this. I know you said that probably January is a little too soon if we're starting from the ground right now. But what does it look, I guess, what does it look like as far as step to step, and then when do the funds come in actually?
You hear about 6 to 8 months out, and it could be like 9 or 10 months before the money shows up. But you'll get feedback, and the feedback will allow you to get started on certain things, but it's not fast. Now the payments, after you get the grant, the payments are set up to be paid as you need them. So if you're paying for rent on a facility, you can get that paid on a monthly basis. If you have to buy a piece of equipment and you need that cash up front, they'll give you the cash up front. If you're paying people on an hourly rate or a monthly rate, they'll pay you based on that. They know how things work, and they also know you're a small business and that you don't have $300,000 to advance hoping to get paid on the back end.
Got it. And then as far as the application process itself, what are the hurdles there?
Planning mostly. You want to have somebody who knows the science really well to do the science half of it. But on the commercialization piece where I focus is you really need to have the people identified and the process identified to execute on the market entry strategy. Those people have to be in the application.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Thanks again.
Okay.
Yeah, we're coming up on time. Thank you so much, Earle. You were really thorough with all of the aspects of SBIR and some SBIR stuff. Do you have any final parting words, high level stuff, something like some sage advice before we completely end the year for Oceanside Chats? You're our last speaker of the holiday season. And so we come back.
It's about, there's ideas out there, and if this one fails, then you work on your next idea. There's a lot of forgiveness in this process, and if you do it once, it doesn't mean you can never do it again. It means you're supposed to go try again. So the fact that the biggest asset the company has are the people and the individuals, and if you get shot down, work on your next idea.
Good advice. Okay, well, thank you for coming. I hope everyone enjoys the holiday season. Keep an eye out in your inbox for the New Year's Oceanside Chat kickoffs. We'll probably kick into gear sometime in early January. Earle, I love having you here and talking about this. It's always a big question mark with teams at the garage about whether or not grant funding is something they should be pursuing and what the process is like. So I'd love to have you back again to speak on this sometime next year as well. So thank you for coming this time and for consistently providing support to the garage and the university.
Glad to help.
Yeah. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Goodbye.
Take care. Bye.